In 1914, the idea of slicing 51 miles through disease-ridden jungle and mountains to move enough earth to bury Manhattan looked impossible without the heavy machines we know today. Yet thousands dared it with only steam shovels, rail cars, and raw willpower. The French had already lost 22,000 lives trying. So how did the Americans succeed where others had failed so catastrophically? The answer reveals both the triumph and human cost behind one of history's boldest engineering gambles. Stretching 51 miles from ocean to ocean, the Panama Canal sliced through dense rainforest, swamps, and the backbone of a continent. The task was not simply to dig a ditch, but to carve a channel wide and deep enough for ocean liners through a landscape that rose over 300 feet above sea level at its highest point. Crews faced a wall of earth and rock so immense that over 10 years they would remove more than 200 million cubic yards of material. That is enough to bury the entire island of Manhattan under a blanket of rubble dozens of feet thick. Every mile demanded a new strategy. Some stretches meant hacking through steaming jungle. Others meant drilling and blasting through volcanic rock, and the most daunting required slicing down the continental divide itself. The sheer volume of earth moved by hand, by steam, by dynamite was greater than any project the world had seen. At the busiest points, tens of thousands labored in shifts, day and night, pushing against the limits of what steam power and human muscle could achieve. There were no hydraulic excavators, no diesel bulldozers, no modern cranes. Instead, a patchwork of steam shovels, spoil trains, and cableways formed a mechanical army, each piece dependent on the next, all moving in tight coordination. The scale was so vast that it demanded not just muscle and machinery, but an entirely new way to organize people and machines, an industrial choreography where a single delay could ripple across the canal's entire length. The magnitude of the challenge was clear from the start: to move a mountain, to bridge two oceans, and to do it all with the tools and technology of the early 20th century. The question was not just how to dig, but how to outthink the land itself. Ferdinand de Lesseps arrived in Panama with a reputation built on the Suez Canal. He was convinced that a sea-level waterway could be carved through the isthmus just as it had been through Egyptian sand. But Panama was not Egypt. The French effort began in 1881, and almost immediately the project ran into disaster. Torrential rain turned excavation pits into swamps. The Chagres River flooded unpredictably, washing away months of labor in hours. The Culebra Cut, a mountain spine at the canal's midpoint, proved treacherous. Its slopes collapsed again and again, burying equipment and men beneath tons of mud. Disease struck with relentless force. Yellow fever and malaria swept through the camps, carried by mosquitoes no one yet understood. Hospitals overflowed, and entire work gangs vanished within weeks. By 1889, the French had excavated about 30 million cubic yards, barely a dent in the isthmus. The death toll reached an estimated 22,000, most of them West Indian and European laborers whose names rarely made it into company records. Financial disaster followed the human one. The Compagnie Universelle du Canal Interoceanique collapsed under the weight of mounting costs and chronic delays. In France, the Panama scandals exploded as bribery, fraud, and political cover-ups were exposed in newspapers and courts. Investors lost fortunes, and public trust in grand engineering schemes evaporated almost overnight. The French left behind rusting machinery, half-dug trenches, and a cautionary tale for anyone who would try again. When American engineers arrived in 1904, they studied every misstep. They saw that a sea-level canal was impossible in Panama's geology and climate. Disease would have to be controlled before digging could restart. Brute force alone would never be enough. The French failure taught a hard lesson. Building a canal through Panama would demand not just machines and men, but a new way of thinking, one that learned from every grave dug along the route. Beneath the tropical sun, a mechanical army marched forward on rails. The backbone of this force was the Bucyrus steam shovel, a 95-ton behemoth. With each swing, its steel bucket tore 8 tons of earth or shattered rock from the isthmus, dropping the load into waiting rail cars. But these machines did not work alone. They relied on a tightly choreographed system where every part had to move in time. Hundreds of locomotives and thousands of dump cars formed a rolling network that snaked through the canal zone. Tracks stretched for more than 100 miles, laid and relaid by gangs of men as the cut deepened. Trains arrived within minutes of each other, their schedules set by dispatchers who used telegraph lines and whistle codes to keep the flow unbroken. When a shovel filled its line of cars, a locomotive would haul the spoil away, sometimes to distant dumps, sometimes to the rising embankments of Gatun Dam. Empty cars cycled back, ready for the next bite. Drilling and blasting teams worked ahead of the shovels. Using pneumatic drills, crews bored holes 20 to 30 feet deep into the rock face, often in carefully planned grids. Each hole was packed with dynamite, then stemmed with sand or clay. At set times, the area was cleared, and the charges detonated in sequence, fracturing the ground for the shovels to attack. The cycle never stopped. Blacksmiths sharpened thousands of drill bits every night, and maintenance crews patched boilers and replaced shattered teeth before dawn. Every roll mattered. Operators balanced steam pressure and timing. Trackmen relayed rails in the mud. Dispatchers kept the trains moving, one delay threatening to stall the entire line. This was industrial choreography on a scale few had seen, each part dependent on the next, all working to outpace the mountain. One scoop, one train load, one blast at a time. 9 miles of excavation through the Continental Divide became a battleground, not just against rock and clay, but against the land itself. The Gillard Cut looked solid from above, layers of volcanic stone and hard-packed earth. But beneath the surface, hidden seams of cucaracha clay ran like soft veins, saturated by tropical rains and weakened by every blast and shovel pass. When the first cracks appeared in October 1907, crews watched as 500,000 cubic yards of earth slid into the channel overnight. The ground moved with a slow, relentless force, swallowing tracks, steam shovels, and rail cars. Some days workers arrived to find the rails twisted like ribbon, shovels buried up to their boilers, and entire work sites erased by the night's shifting mud. The most devastating slide came in September 1912, just as crews thought they were nearing victory. The Cucaracha Slide alone poured millions of cubic yards back into the cut, undoing months of labor in a matter of hours. Men scrambled for safety as the earth flowed around them, describing the movement as a tropical glacier, not of ice but of clay and stone. Engineers realized the geology was more treacherous than any blueprint had suggested. Layers of clay acted as natural slip planes, lubricated by rain and pressure, turning the banks into slow-motion avalanches. Every landslide forced the removal of material not once, but again and again. The mountain refused to yield, and the canal's central corridor became a test of endurance and adaptation, where each day's progress could be wiped away before sunrise. William C. Gorgas arrived in Panama with a simple but radical conviction. Before a single shovel could make progress, disease had to be driven out. The French had lost thousands to yellow fever and malaria, turning the isthmus into a graveyard for workers and ambition alike. Gorgas, drawing on lessons from Havana, built a sanitation army. His teams drained every stagnant ditch and swamp they could find, stripping away the breeding grounds for mosquitoes. Where water couldn't be removed, it was treated with oil or larvicide. Crews installed screens on every building, barracks, hospitals, and mess halls, so that not a single mosquito could slip inside. Fumigation squads moved from house to house, burning sulfur and pyrethrum, choking out the insects that carried death from room to room. At first, many engineers and officials doubted the expense and effort, but Gorgas pressed on, convinced that the only way to keep a workforce alive in Panama's climate was to make the mosquito an enemy of progress. He issued strict rules for garbage collection, insisted on covered latrines, and demanded clean piped water for every camp. As the months passed, the results became impossible to ignore. Yellow fever, which had killed with impunity for decades, vanished from the canal zone by 1906. Malaria rates, too, began to drop. For the first time, hospitals emptied out, and the daily death toll receded. The transformation was so complete that the canal zone, once a byword for tropical disease, became a place where workers could survive long enough to finish the job. Gorges's campaign didn't just save lives, it made the rest of the canal possible. With disease beaten back, the real work could begin. While excavation crews fought earth and disease, another army worked beside them, raising the structures that would make the canal possible. Across the isthmus, teams poured concrete for the canal's massive locks, each chamber large enough to hold an ocean liner. Without modern concrete mixers, engineers built entire batching plants on site, churning out thousands of cubic yards of concrete every day. Overhead, cableways stretched across the lock pits, their buckets swinging back and forth in a steady rhythm. Each load of wet concrete was lowered into wooden forms, layer by layer, until the walls rose story by story. Carpenters and steelworkers moved in tandem, setting forms and reinforcing bars as fast as the cableways could deliver the next bucket. At Gatun, the spoil from distant cuts took on new purpose. Train after train dumped earth and rock to build the Gatun Dam, 1.5 miles long, filled in layers, compacted by the weight of locomotives and spreader cars. This dam would hold back the Chagres River, flooding the jungle to create Gatun Lake. When finished, the lake covered 160 square miles, making it the largest man-made lake on Earth at the time. The dam and lake transformed a wild, flood-prone river into a staircase for ships, lifting them 85 feet above sea level before lowering them back down on the other side. Construction never paused. Concrete was poured day and night. Embankments rose with each passing train, and the canal's skeleton took shape alongside the relentless digging. In every direction, progress advanced on multiple fronts, each piece relying on the others to keep the Gatun project moving forward. At the heart of the canal's progress was a workforce drawn from every corner of the globe, numbering over 40,000 at its peak. But the promise of steady pay and adventure came wrapped in a rigid hierarchy. Every worker was slotted into one of two payrolls, the gold roll and the silver roll. The gold roll meant American and European supervisors, engineers, and skilled tradesmen, almost exclusively white, who were paid in United States dollars. Their lives in the canal zone included screened family houses, access to well-stocked commissaries, private hospitals, and schools for their children. Most of the men who swung picks, hauled rails, or drilled rock were West Indians from Barbados, Jamaica, and beyond. They filled the silver roll, paid in local currency that bought less, with no paid leave and no family housing. Silver roll workers lived in crowded barracks, ate in separate mess halls, and shopped at their own commissaries stocked with cheaper goods. Even hospital wards and cemetery plots were divided by payroll. A typical West Indian laborer earned 10 cents an hour for a 10-hour day, 6 days a week. White Americans doing similar work could take home twice as much, with paid vacations on top. The gulf extended beyond paychecks. The gold roll's privileges built a world apart: screened porches, fresh milk, and Sunday outings, while the silver roll meant long days under the sun, nights in noisy dormitories, and a diet that rarely changed. Yet despite these divisions, the immense task of digging the canal depended on their combined effort. Foremen's whistles and hand signals cut through the language barriers, and the rhythm of work moved from one end of the isthmus to the other. The canal's progress was measured in yards of earth moved, but its true engine was the diverse, often segregated, human force that kept the shovels swinging and the trains rolling. George Washington Goethals, the Army engineer who took over as chief of the canal project in 1907, became known for making hard decisions on the fly. When the Chagres River's floodwaters threatened to overwhelm the original design at Gatun Dam, Goethals did not wait for disaster. He called for late-night meetings, demanded new calculations, and ordered the spillway enlarged, with higher steel gates, a wider concrete throat, and a heavier apron to break the river's force. Blueprints were redrawn while concrete was already being poured. The dam that stands today owes its strength to those last-minute changes, not the plans inherited from the French. Improvisation was not limited to concrete and gates. As landslides buried tracks and shovels in the Culebra Cut, Goethals authorized crews to flatten slopes, carve new terraces, and reroute the railroad as often as needed. He insisted that progress continue, even if it meant tearing up yesterday's work and starting over. This relentless adaptation kept the canal moving forward, but it came at a cost measured in lives. Between 1904 and 1914, over 5,600 workers died under American management. Disease claimed the majority. Malaria and pneumonia lingered even after yellow fever was beaten back. Accidents took the rest, men crushed by trains, caught in machinery, or buried alive when the mountain collapsed without warning. Every emergency redesign, every field fix, was a gamble against time and fate. The canal's final triumph rests on the names recorded in ledgers and the thousands more whose stories ended in the mud and stone of Panama. August 15, 1914. The steamship Ancon, a cargo steamer built in Philadelphia, entered the locks at the Atlantic end of the Panama Canal just after sunrise. Canal workers, engineers, and dignitaries lined the banks, some perched on piles of excavated earth, others standing atop concrete lock walls still stained with the marks of wooden forms. The Ancon's passage was not a staged demonstration or a symbolic gesture. It was the first official full-length transit by a ship from ocean to ocean, proof that the channel was open and operational. The voyage took just under 10 hours. At each lock, the Ancon rose and fell on beds of water drawn from Gatun Lake, guided by electric locomotives called mules. The ship crossed the vast artificial lake, glided through the Culebra Cut, once the mountain that threatened to bury the project, and descended the giant staircases of the Pacific locks. Every gate, valve, and cable performed as designed. By dusk, the Ancon slipped into the Pacific, completing a journey that once meant months and thousands of extra miles around Cape Horn. For the workers who had carved, blasted, and poured their way across the isthmus, the sight of a ship passing from sea to sea was more than a technical milestone. It was the moment the impossible became real. 51 miles of canal, built without the benefit of modern machinery, now open to the world. Today, container ships cross the canal in hours, powering a third of global maritime trade. Yet its foundations rest on sweat, loss, and ingenuity, reminders that every shortcut in our connected world comes at a hidden human cost. As we build ever faster, the real challenge is remembering what and who made the impossible possible. Share your thoughts below.